Diolch yn fawr, Rhian. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak. I can remember being on holiday on a cruise ship, having voted by post for the first time in my life, and people saying, what can happen in 2 weeks? Well, we had the referendum, the ambition to leave the EU, and the Prime Minister resigned. So that's what can happen when you go on holiday. You don't just get 700 emails, you also have things happen. The UK's exit from the European Union has been on the agenda for some time now. And it feels like people are getting tired of hearing, tired of the political toing and froing, and people are getting confused about what's important and what's not. And I know that the previous two speakers have been very eloquent in setting out some of the challenges that we have. I'd like to start with a quote from the Welsh Government's Deputy Minister with responsibility for equality, Jane Hutt. It's quite a lengthy quote, but I think it's something that helps set the context for how things could be tackled in Wales and what could be done in Wales in the context of being a devolved function, being a devolved country, having devolved legislation, but grappling with that. Some aspects of the work in the space in which we are talking is devolved and some of it is not. So equality law is not devolved. Trade is not devolved. But taking the opportunities of what is devolved and what can be done and what we can do differently in Wales. To paraphrase Jane, when she said that we continue to live under the uncertainty of Brexit a year ago, I think we're pretty much in a similar position now. We must prepare carefully to ensure that the rights and benefits the people of Wales have received through membership of the EU are not lost. We are seeking to introduce a new distinctly Welsh approach to promoting and safeguarding equality, social justice and human rights. The Section 81 of the Government of Wales Act requires the Welsh Government to act compatibly with the European Convention on Human Rights as reflected in our domestic law by the Human Rights Act 1998. So that set the scene for what for the context of Wales and under the Welsh Government that we currently have. She went on to say, to demonstrate and reaffirm our commitments to these principles, we're taking forward work to explore options to safeguard equality and human rights in Wales. This will begin with commencing the socio-economic duty in Wales. We're also commissioning research to explore wider options, including how we might incorporate UN conventions, including the Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, into Welsh law. So there we have it from our Deputy Minister, second in command, as it were, setting out a statement of wanting to try to use the powers that we have in Wales to protect the rights of disabled people. We know, as Rhian has mentioned, that the research into further incorporation of UN conventions is just getting underway. There will be a steering group that will guide that piece of research, led by Simon Hoffman from Swansea University in collaboration with a third sector organisation and other partners. That is likely to report at the end of the calendar year. So if you set that in the context of the time frame, it's quite tight when that will come out. But it will be an important piece of work. I think it's important to say that the experience that we have in Wales of partial incorporation on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into domestic law has been quite successful and it's been positive. What we've found is in our research around what difference has it made, it has made a difference. We would urge further incorporation and full incorporation of the UN conventions, including the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, because we do see that when they are incorporated, there is a difference for people, for beneficiaries of that convention. They are quite complex, the way that they're written, and some of them are written obviously in the context of the time in which they are written. Some are older than others, and that is, you can see that in the way that they're written and how ambitious they are or they're not. The UN CRPD for the rights of disabled people is quite wide-ranging, and further incorporation of that into domestic law would help with some of the protections that might be lost as we exit the EU. So one of the things that we believe that is really important, and that was put into our 5-point plan in 2017, which is still live now, the issues that we talked about there around scrutiny, which we've been talked about, retaining equality and human rights legal frameworks, and ensuring that the UK is a global leader on equality and human rights. Those things are still important to us, and we believe that they're important to our Welsh Government. We need to ensure, and it's all of our responsibility in this room, to hold both the UK and the Welsh Government to account to ensure there's no regression on equality and human rights. And there was talk about 18 or so months ago about what would a Welsh human rights bill look like, what might that be. That's something I think that we need to test further if we believe that there is a rowback and a regression at UK level as the timing comes through. There have been some assurances around the fact that there won't be, but it's whether or not we can be confident in that. If we can't be confident in that, we think that now is the time to explore what Wales could do differently in the context of where is the competence, because there might not be full competence to do all of it, but what can we do? We think that it's really important that there are times like today when people can get together and talk about the issues and maybe plan some actions and some shared ambitions to work forward, because we do need to work together in collaboration. There are lots of practical ways that things could work, and we know that we've been encouraging all political parties to look to see what could be done in Wales and what could be done differently. We know that not long ago, Plaid Cymru, for example, proposed embedding the rights of disabled people into Welsh law. That wasn't taken forward at that time, but looking at the potential of further incorporation brings that back onto the table. So it's good that we know that there is agreement across more than one party in our National Assembly for Wales, soon to be our Senedd or Welsh Parliament. We know that, for example, the housing organisation Tai Pawb has been active in promoting plans for a right to housing in Wales, which again helps to protect the rights of disabled people in Wales. It would bring great benefits to that, linked in with the new framework and action plan, the refreshed action plan for independent living for disabled people. I'd also like to highlight the socio-economic duty, because I think this is a piece of domestic legislation that could really help to start to bridge some of those gaps that we're already experiencing and some of those gaps that we might continue to experience. Under the Equality Act, Part 1, there is a socio-economic duty. It's a due regard duty, like all the duties in the Equality Act, that when making strategic decisions, those bodies named under that section of the Act have to have a due regard to the desirability of taking socioeconomic factors into account. So, for example, if you are a local authority and you have to make cuts in your bus services, it's a strategic decision, it's something that's going to go to your board, you might look at your population, look at where you've got areas of socioeconomic disadvantage, and say, well, actually, what we will do is we will not cut the bus services there because people are more likely to be reliant on public transport. People living in socioeconomic disadvantage, as we all know, are more likely to be disabled, people from certain ethnic minority backgrounds, single-parent households, less likely to be able to afford their own transport. So you don't cut your bus services there, you cut your bus services in your leafy suburbs where everybody's got at least 2 cars sitting on the drive. So that's the sorts of decisions that the socioeconomic duty will highlight. So that's a good thing for disabled people in Wales. That duty comes online on the 1st of April, and we are advising Welsh Government on that and on the implementation of that. So we know that we've got more people who identify as being disabled living in Wales than in any other part of the UK. 26% of our population is made up of are disabled. So we know that it's a big issue in Wales in the context of being able to support and empower disabled people to be socially, politically and economically active as they wish. We also know that at the moment only between 1.2 and 1.3 of disabled people begin apprenticeships in Wales. And when you set that in the context of 26% of our population, 1.3% of people out starting apprenticeships, that should be nearer sort of 14, 15, 20%. So there are opportunities in terms of the new legislation that we are bringing online, and if we could further incorporate the UN Convention that would be supportive of disabled people being empowered to live lives as they wish following Brexit after we completely exit. We've asked the First Minister to come to talk about the socioeconomic duty with us on the 11th of March, and it would be great if there could be people from this room as part of that conversation so that you can ask those direct questions. We also know that one of the big issues for Wales is funding, EU structural funds and what that might look like. We know that that's important. We believe that that's so important that we commissioned our own report on the future of funding for equality and human rights in Britain. And we explored how EU structural funds promote equality and human rights across Great Britain, and we highlight projects across England, Scotland and Wales that use them. And what we found was there are major projects aimed at the promotion and protection of equality and human rights that receive that funding. And although the UK government has committed to replacing funds with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and the original promise, as it were, was that there would be no regression of funding levels, I think it's important that we have to remember that that commitment was made under a different government. We've had a general election since then. So it's really important, as Milena has said, that you engage with that consultation process. Wales receives €140 per person per year on average from our current funding arrangements from the EU. So that's approximately 3.5 billion euros in total between 2014 and 2020. That's what's at stake in terms of funding. A lot of those projects have focused on supporting disabled people, women and those from ethnic minorities to gain the skills and experience they need to succeed in the labour market. And others are intended to alleviate poverty and support those with multiple disadvantages. That includes disabled people. We know that in our research that there were, of the 211 projects in the UK that were currently being funded, the largest focus is on young people at 31%. The next largest focus is on disabled people at 18%. So there is a lot at stake for disabled people. And we know that 38 projects that receive EU funding have a specific focus on enabling and supporting disabled people in deprived areas. So there's an awful lot there that we need to think about. So we do feel that we want to mitigate against that sort of cliff edge in funding, and it's really important, and it's really good to see colleagues from Welsh Government here and special advisors to our senior ministers here in the room to hear these messages and to contribute, because it's important that the messages get back to the centre. One of the things that we think is really important is that we don't have temporary pauses in funding streams, so that we don't have a situation where we know that funding will kick back in, but it's not going to happen for 6 months or it's not going to happen for a year, so you lose the expertise of the people that are working in those spaces. So that's really important. We need to think about long-term funding and stability, and not simply about project funding. And this is where there could be a positive benefit in terms of funds coming through, if they could be more aimed at sustainability and longevity and exit strategies, rather than project after project where people have to sort of fit to new rules every 2 or 3 years. And we also think there's an opportunity to streamline and simplify processes. So if that could be used as an opportunity to do that, that again would be a positive thing. We know that aside from funding, there are other concerns that people have, and some of the practical impacts of the exit from the EU are around things like digital by default of applications for settled status. That's really important for disabled people and the people that are around them and support them. As Rian has said, a large number of disabled people use direct payments to employ people. A lot of the people that they employ are EU citizens. If we have a digital by default situation, it's likely that people who are disabled, who are more likely to live in less prosperous parts of Wales, less likely to have access to digital, that could also be an additional challenge that needs to be considered. And also the potential for a shortening of the window for applying for settled status to be reduced by 6 months, depending on how the deal is going. There's a likelihood that instead of having until July 2021, it might be end of 2020. So it's about making sure that people are vigilant about those aspects, so that you're not surprised. I think this is the thing that we're concerned about, is surprises. I think in terms of what might be the positives that come out for disabled people, what might be the opportunities. If we do have positive trade deals coming through, then there are some positives in Wales under the Equality Act. For example, the procurement duty under the Equality Act. There are specific duties in Wales around how we procure or contract goods and services. That might be something that could be used to the advantage of disabled people by ensuring ethical contracting, an end to 0 hours contracts unless that's for the benefit of the person who's in receipt of that contract, and also to think about not looking at the cheapest, but looking at the best value, and that best value including social value. And again, that's something that would be of benefit to disabled people who are engaging in the labour market, who are able to demonstrate the social value of their engagement, which is something that you're able to demonstrate far more effectively, perhaps, than some private, very commercially driven organisations that don't have a values base. So there are lots of challenges. I think we do need to look at the opportunities as well, and we also need to take the advantage of having a whole political system in Wales that seems to be more responsive to the equality and human rights agenda. And that's certainly something that you can test out this afternoon, where there is a panel where there are politicians coming from different political parties. So that's something that you can draw out there. I'm going to leave it there. It's a topic I think that we could all talk for days, and also just leaving you with, we need, it's time for action. And if we don't hear any talk, we need to generate the noise ourselves together. Thank you.